Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. Actually, welcome to my basement. I'm gonna give like a minute or two for anyone to come on in. Hello, I saw someone pop in. I don't know who it is, but welcome. But yeah, welcome to my reading of Little Mushroom. I'm really excited you're here. We're gonna cover chapters 10 through 12 because I do 3 chapters a night. Well, I try to do 3 chapters a night. A little bit about this channel. It's very chill. I will be doing side commentary. I enjoy the reading. Yay! Welcome back, Mo Mars Rover. Mo Mars Rover. I'm just gonna call you Mars Rover. Is that okay? How have you been? Have you had a good few days? Okay. Yeah. I'm stumbling a little over it. I'm glad that's fine. Yeah. As I was saying while I wait for you to reply, it's a very chill channel. The only thing I own is the physical copy of this book in front of me, and my time. I do not own any of the rights to Little Mushroom. I'm not an author. I don't gain anything from this. I'm doing this purely because I want to. And I want to read it and learn the story with all of you. Also, partially because of the closing of Peach House, I feel like books should be available to anyone who wants them. And I have them, so I thought I'd share. But yeah, give it one more minute. Oh, the glowing light above my head behind me. I was actually really excited about it. It is in the shape of a heart. And though you can't see it, it actually says "do it for the plot." I'm a little disappointed that it doesn't show up, but I'll live. But yeah, that's what the floating little bump is above my head. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. A little kind of summary of where we ended. Oh, I'm so glad the promise of more Little Mushroom has gotten you through your pretty busy few days, Mars Rover. That makes me happy. I'm happy you're here too. But yeah, right before we ended, we had the worm xenogenics going after the disruptors, and we got a little bit of a history lesson about Judgment Day and the different ages and how kind of the arbiters came into being, and kind of a little hint at some of the quirkiness about the arbiters, aka before the current one, our Ice King. They lasted maybe about 7 years before going mad, and that's kind of where it ended. They were basically saying like, hey, he's never shown emotion except for you, Unji. That, I guess that means he's hanging on. Or wait, I guess that means he's not. Oh boy. And let me double check. I think that's where we left off. No, we left off with a bug hitting a window, and it was a colorful beetle had struck the window. So we got our history lesson, and now I have a feeling we're going to have a little bit of action. All right. Chapter 10. Wait there. All right. So somewhere downstairs, a woman screamed. Perhaps she had also seen the bugs. The beetle, approximately the size of a human palm, crawled slowly over the glass. On its 8 slender legs were densely packed small protrusions that adhered smoothly to the glass. And in the middle of each protrusion was a pinprick-sized white dot, which was a suction cup. The beetle dragged along a long, soft brown tentacle behind its drop-shaped tail, leaving a wet, dark brown ooze in its wake as it crawled. It seemed to want to come in. Ugh. Brown ooze kind of sounds really gross. Like, it's already like, great, giant bug on my window. But it oozing? Ugh. Poet tested the seams between two of the window panes by running over them with his fingers. It's fine. It's sealed, so it can't get in. Each generation is worse than the last, Mr. Shaw said. They just keep getting uglier. Before, they still looked like bugs. The fusion of genes, Poet looked at the glass. The more fusing there is, the more bizarre its appearance and the stronger its infectionness is. I know a scientist, and he said that throughout the past 100 years, none of humankind's research could explain the principle of infection. Huh, Mr. Shaw said. He released a meaningless sound from his mouth, but then shrank into a corner of the room, as far away from the window as possible, and said, "Can't you close the curtains? I want to look at the city some more." As Poet spoke, he lowered one side of the curtain, shrouding the room in darkness. Within the gloom, a strange grief showed in his profile. This city may not have much time left. Anji looked outside. It was early morning, and beneath the dim skies, the gray city stretched outwards, half of it concealed in the thin white mist. The sun had risen, and the mist was burning off, revealing some colossal mechanical structures at maximum range of his field of vision that towered and pierced straight up into the sky. Humans always had many strange devices that guaranteed the base's safety, but there were some times in which they couldn't do so, such as right now. Poet turned toward him. "You don't seem the slightest bit afraid." Anji pursed his lips, unsure how to respond. Poet lowered the other side of the curtains and smiled at him. "You truly are very strange." "Am I?" Anji asked. "You're too quiet, like it doesn't matter regardless of what happens next," Poet said. "In our generation, there are very few people with your type of character." Anji smiled. "Perhaps." It was impossible for there to not be even the slightest difference between mushrooms and humans. In an attempt to make himself more human-like, he asked Poet, "Then what shall we do now?" Poet thought for 3 seconds and then said, "Pray. Pray that the ultrasonic disperser hasn't been completely destroyed. Or pray that this is just a group of bugs that are brainless and live entirely on instinct. After that, pray that our glass is sufficiently solid and won't be easily smashed." Right as he finished speaking, the sounds of things pelting the window came in a flurry. It was the sound of countless bugs flying into the glass. It sounded like that movie with the crows. Boom, 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 boom. Mr. Shaw shot a dark look at Poet. "I pray for you to be a mute." Poet became flustered too. He lifted a corner of the curtain, then swiftly closed it again. "Don't look, you guys." "Already saw it," Mr. Shaw said. "The bug swarms have come." The following moment, his countenance abruptly changed. "Hurry, check the vents!" Poet suddenly looked towards one corner of the room. "The vent is there." The direction they looked in was right over Anji's head. Was a hole leading outside that was protected by wire mesh, but because it hadn't been repaired for a long time, had deteriorated and had an opening formed. Sorry about that. Seeing it, Poet tore off half of his shirt sleeve and handed it to Anji. "Plug it up!" The vent was not small. Anji accepted the fabric, then wadded it up in his right hand and stuffed it into the hole. "It's not enough." Poet tore off another piece. Anji held the first piece in place with one hand and took the other place with his other hand. Felt a sudden sting of pain in the tip of his right index finger. Anji paused, then calmly stuffed the other wad of fabric in in as well, firmly stopping up the vent before sitting back down on the bed. While Mr. Shaw and Poet were checking the rest of the room for other holes, he lifted his index finger up to check his eye, up to his eyes. A red spot the size of a pinprick. Ooh. Oh, another person joined. Hello! The texture of his skin shifted slightly, changing into snow-white hype. Taking advantage of how the other two were facing away from him, he tore off those hype with a fierce yank. New hype extended from the breakage point and formed a human finger once more, a new one without any wound. Anji didn't know if doing so would have any effect, nor could he see anything wrong with the hype he tore off, but he didn't really have any other options. There aren't any other holes, Poet said, turning back around. Anji replied. However, the sounds of insects colliding into the glass came faster and harder. The glass rattled as if it was about to shatter. The broadcast in the corridor continued to issue instructions, but they were nothing more than some nonsensical "please close the doors and windows, and do not panic." Poet sat down, his face slightly pale. It's in God's hands now, I guess. Shut up right now, Mr. Shaw's gaze was grim. Yelling at Poet, he looked at Anji. Ji didn't understand why. What is it? Hurry, Mr. Shaw said. Call your man. Anji was speechless. Hello! Welcome! I'm glad you're here. District 1, Dispersion Center. So what you missed was basically the bugs are slamming against the window now, and they're plugging up all the holes so they can't get in. And Anji potentially got stung, but he ripped off the spot and was like, this should be fine. All right. District 1 Dispersion Center. The huge black ultrasonic disperser loomed half-hidden beneath the gray skies, its disc-shaped main body making it look like an enormous flower blooming in the city. As the car sped along the road, the buildings continuously drew away, and the shadow of the disperser up ahead swiftly grew. If the dispersion center is destroyed, Lu Feng said, interrupting him, will the other dispersers still work normally? They might stop working, the researcher said, then briefly fell silent. The operation of the dispersers is excessively complicated. To ensure that the entirety of the outer city is perfectly covered by the ultrasonic waves, the intensity and wave bands of all the dispersers are uniformly managed from afar by the dispersion center. The emergency procedures are not promptly initiated when the center was destroyed. I'm afraid there will be very serious consequences. However, that's only the worst outcome, and the probability of it happening is very low, he said. The Disperser 1 at the Dispersion Center is the biggest ultrasonic disperser in the entirety of the outer city. Because its power is too strong, it has adverse effects on the human body, which is why District 1 doesn't have permanent residents, and there aren't many workers or troops stationed at or near Dispersion Center. In the event of insufficient manpower, temporary loss of communication may be because of other reasons, not necessarily... His voice abruptly cut off as he looked through the car window and straight at the ultrasonic disperser up ahead. Over 100 years ago, in the peaceful age's springtime, when flowers and leaves were developing, gardeners would spray insect repellent on the plants so they would be free from insect bites. And at the present moment, the ultrasonic disperser, this black flower, was covered with protrusions that were striped in gray, white, black, and yellow. Huge worms had crawled all over it. No, it wasn't only worms. His breathing became sharp pants, stuttering all of a sudden. No, he said. Colonel, do you see it? Lu Feng yanked the steering wheel around. The car executed a hair-raising sharp turn on the narrow road and drove back in the direction it came from. At first, the armored vehicles behind it angrily flashed their lights, but then they all made sharp U-turns as well. At the end of the road, the black swarm of bugs exploded like fireworks, covering the sky as they flew up and came back down, like a sudden downpour of rain. The anthropods' exoskeleton-covered bodies pelted against the glass. It felt like the entire car was moving forward in the face of stray bullets. Inside the car, the communicator's volume was set to maximum. The operator's violently trembling voice came from it. Colonel, emergency communication from District 2. Full-scale breakout of bug swarms. Requesting assistance. Emergency communication from District 3. Large number of insect monsters were discovered during the evacuation process. Requesting assistance. Emergency communication from City Defense Agency. Emergency communication from the City Affairs Office. Emergency communication from District 8. Connect to District 8, Lu Feng said quickly. Can the underground shelter safely accept the entire city's emergency evacuees? Colonel Liu, the person on the other end, spoke even more quickly. Small flying mosquitoes have entered via the ventilation system. More than 10 infected ones have appeared here, requesting the trial court's assistance. 3-second long silence. Lu Feng said, Kill the infected ones. Everyone else take refuge and wait for assistance. The communication line was cut off. Colonel, young voice rang out. The trial court has assembled, and at present there have been no casualties. Disperse assistance to the various districts. Prioritize District 8. Yes, sir. The call ended. Colonel. In the car, the researcher spoke with a forced veneer of composure. We're returning to the main city. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. Lu Feng's tone of voice was flat. The main city? The main city has an independent defense and dispersion system so it can ensure absolute safety. The car gradually slowed. Up ahead was a fork in the road. Lu Feng said, What about the outer city? The entire outer city was exposed. The insect monsters can penetrate anywhere with their advantageous body sizes, so the danger level of the insect swarms is higher than when the southeastern base fell to the rodent swarms. Calm gradually returned to the researcher's voice. You may be the arbiter, but under these circumstances you can't save anyone. The abrupt justifications allowed the researcher to regain his reason and composure. He even smiled as he said, It's meaningless to go anywhere now. There's no way to reduce the number of casualties. You know that what I'm saying is correct. You can't protect anything else, but you can keep us safe. A voice came from the communicator again. Previously, the situation was critical, so Lu Feng set it to emergency mode. The communication was automatically answered 3 seconds later as a result. But what came through wasn't an operator's voice. Colonel, a clear voice spoke, slower than the speed Lu Feng was accustomed to, the soft lightness to the words. Your things are still here with me. Where are you? Lu Feng asked. Next to the City Defense Agency, Anji said. Lots of bugs are crashing into the window. Is he gonna go get his man? I think he's gonna go get his man. There was a tremble at the end of his words, as if he was afraid. Lu Feng turned the steering wheel halfway around and drove onto one of the road's branches. The researcher looked at the abandoned branch with eyes wide open, his body seemingly about to bounce up from the seat, yet secured in place by the seatbelt. He blurted out, You! Lu Feng seemed to have not heard him at all. He only replied to the communicator, Wait there. That was a rather short chapter, but that was actually the end of chapter 10. So just a second, I'm going to get to 11. Oh, actually, I'm going to tilt this down just a little bit. I was showing off the little heart at the top, because that says, do it for the plot. Not that you can tell, it just looks like a giant glowing heart. I tried. Okay. Chapter 11. God judged the common people, even using good and evil as the basis. philosophic on that one. Anji found himself being let out with his head wrapped up in the uniform coat after Lu Feng kicked the door open. That's hot. I'm sorry, but like, hey, sweetie, can you come pick me up? I'm on my way. Well, bam. That's cute. It's cute. Lu Feng had brought over a small ultrasonic jammer to the building entrance, temporarily clearing out a space with a 10-meter circumference. Anji was safely stuffed into the car, and Poet and Mr. Shaw climbed in as well, and the three of them squeezed into the back seats. Lu Feng returned to the driver's seat and said, "We're over capacity." Anji somehow felt that the arbiter was targeting him again. Mr. Shaw took the initiative, saying, "Reporting in, I'm not a person, so we aren't over capacity." "Oh," Lu Feng said. He made a call. "The rescue plan using ultrasonic jammers is feasible. Organizing large-scale transfers of residents is recommended." Howard's voice came from the other side. "Transfer to the underground shelter?" Lu Feng said, "Going to District 8's shelter first to confirm that it's safe." "Thank you for your hard work." Lu Feng started the engine and their car drove around a bend and headed toward District 8. Along the way, Lu Feng's communicator rang madly. Just as the city affairs officer's office sent a distress signal, District 5 requested reinforcements, and just after District 5 requested reinforcements, the trial court called to say that their manpower was insufficient. By the end, Lu Feng's replies were becoming very robotic. "Please transfer to the City Defense Agency. Please transfer to the City Defense Agency. Please transfer to the City Defense Agency. You've worked hard. Please transfer to the City Defense Agency. Lu Feng, you fucking..." This time the other party was Howard. Lu Feng hung up right away. But after hanging up, he frowned slightly and asked the researcher next to him, "Have I received communications from District 6? I don't think so," the researcher said. Lu Feng dialed a number. "District 6? Hello, this is the District 6 City Affairs Office. May I ask?" The operator's voice was so calm that even Anji was surprised. Lu Feng frowned even more deeply. "Trial Court Lu Feng. How are things at District 6? The other party paused. "Everything is normal in District 6. Do you have any..." Lu Feng interrupted again. "Everything is normal?" "Indeed." Lu Feng nearly hung up and looked at the researcher. The researcher was initially stunned, but then his voice couldn't hide his excitement. "There's only one explanation. That District 6 ultrasonic dispenser emergency procedure has successfully started." "Wow," Poet said. Lu Feng continued dialing. "Trial Court Lu Feng. Please confirm again that everything is normal in District 6. Please confirm that the disperser is working correctly." Confirming that everything is normal. The operator's voice even contained a hint of uncertainty. "Well, Colonel, has something happened?" "Yes." Lu Feng's reply was short and direct. "Immediately raise the isolation walls, confirm the material supplies, and prepare to shelter others." "Yes, sir." "Howard, the situation has changed. Have the entire city take shelter in District 6. "Okay," the other party said. "The City Defense Agency will be responsible for the rescue and transfer of personnel." "Roger that," Lu Feng said. "The trial court will be responsible for the screening of personnel." "Thank you for your hard work." After the call ended, Lu Feng once again dialed a number, and Anji noticed that the string of numbers was unusually short. "Main City United Front Center. Hello, Colonel Lu." "Trial Court Lu Feng. Requesting jurisdiction to try the host city. Please give expected mortality and duration of implementation." Lu Feng was silent for 3 seconds before saying 60%. 5 days. "Please wait." "Trying the whole city," Anji heard Poet murmur next to him. He said, "Isn't this..." Sir Shah looked straight ahead as he said, "Judgment Day." 5 minutes later, a voice came from the communicator. Permission granted to implement. Understood. The car turned around and drove towards District 6. On the whole way there, Anji felt that Lu Feng was unusually silent. When they got onto District 5's road, one of the City Defense Agency's huge armored vehicles was parked up ahead. An ugly ultrasonic device was temporarily installed on top of it and was currently rescuing the residents inside the building. Lu Feng stopped at the bottom of the armored vehicle and opened the car door. I'm going to a meeting to prepare for Judgment Day, he said. You all go with the City Defense Agency. Anji could only blindly obey the Arbiter's order. It wasn't until the City Defense Agency's soldiers stuffed him into the armored vehicle that he suddenly recalled he had forgotten to return the coat to Lu Feng again. And unexpectedly, Lu Feng hadn't asked for it. I have a feeling this is going to be a theme. Where this coat, like, he's going to be like, oh, I need to return this. Oh, didn't happen. There was no time to go find Lu Feng again. With a dull sound, the armored vehicle's compartment closed. The light disappeared before it drove toward District 6. In the darkness, there were human bodies all around. Poet clutched Anji's hand. Anji's other hand clutched Mr. Shaw's sleeve. The car compartment shook slightly, and within the warm and humid air, the sounds of crying came from somewhere. Did you hear that? Poet murmured. This Judgment Day, the expected mortality rate is 60%. Anji made an affirmative sound. I'm a bit scared, Poet said, but we'll live. And she didn't know. Was indeed a bit anxious, but because of Judgment Day. Not because of Judgment Day, but rather because of that bug bite. Seeming to feel his stiffness, Poet gently patted his back. Don't be scared. Sleep for now. Anji made a soft sound in reply and closed his eyes. I'm just checking. The slight swaying of the compartment made it very easy for one to enter dreamland. The world gradually darkened and turned heavier when a scene suddenly appeared before his eyes. The earth, wind, blurry but expansive vision, strange fluctuations. This wasn't something humans could see. He was flying with the wind around him, and his body was very light. Where was he flying to? He saw it. A blurry gray city, warmth coming from it. With a start, Anji jerked awake. He blankly looked at the darkness before him. The scene from just now was too blurry, so he didn't know what it meant. But he encountered similar scenes before in the Abyss's cave. His hype absorbed Anzi's blood and took root in Anzi's organs and bones. Human knowledge had appeared before his eyes in the same way. Anji softly panted for breath, lowered his head, uneasily rubbing the finger pad of his thumb with the bitten finger. The Abyss, no monster would think to attack mushrooms, but he occasionally bumped into bloody remains of some creature's body parts, or experienced his hype being broken by the sharp thorns on the vines, but he had never been infected before. He didn't know if it was because of luck or some other reason. So what would happen this time? The unexpected arrival of the next calamity was also like the sudden arrival of the trials. Oh boy. Here it comes. Actually, before we hear about that, I need to blow my nose real quick. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. Late at night, at the entrance to District 6, dim yellow lamplight shone silently. The black crowd formed a long, snaking line along the isolation wall that extended to the limits of one's line of sight. The sounds of insects flapping wings came from all directions, and one could imagine how they covetously gazed upon this city, as though they were gazing upon a warm room that could provide future generations. At the same time, the rumbling sounds of rolling vehicle wheels, the sounds of caterpillar treads, the vibration of the earth as heavy armored vehicles rolled over it came as well. The military was rescuing the residents of the various residential districts in a continuous stream, and the rail transit trains likewise bore the responsibility of transporting residents. Sometimes bugs sneaked into the trains, but they were in no position to care. After these residents reached the periphery of District 6, they lined up at the end of the walk, awaiting trial. The queue was a black stream with an uncountable number of people. They moved forward slowly, and after passing their trial, they could enter the safe District 6. The robotic broadcast didn't stop for even a moment as it emphasized, "Everyone, please observe the queue discipline. Everyone, please wait patiently," and so on. Screams would occasionally come from amidst the line as a person mutated in full view of the public, after which the soldiers patrolling around the line would immediately open fire. After some gunshots, the crowd would change from their initial restlessness to a deathly silence. The speed at which advanced the speed in which they advanced was very slow. Nobody was willing to move forward, but the soldiers were constantly herding them along. However, the main source of the gunshots was not the middle of the queue, the city gate at the isolation wall. "It's been 100 years," an old man said. "Judgment Day has come again." The 9-year-old boy the old man was holding by the hand lifted his head and fearfully looked at his elder, but didn't receive any hint of comfort worth mentioning. The old man's eyes were completely empty as he merely tightened his grip on the boy's hand. Outside, it was bugs that were killing people. They had been rescued from the bug swarms and arrived at District 6, where people were killing people. At least when God judged the common people, good and evil were his basis for doing so. In front of the trial court, however, some people had done nothing at all, but had to face death. That's depressing as all hell. The night deepened, and the boundless sound of wind came from afar, resembling distant ocean tides. With a gunshot, someone in front of Anji fell, and 2 soldiers dragged his corpse away. Each residential district had a massive garbage incinerator, and now it was used to incinerate corpses. Another gunshot, and another person fell. The line continuously shrank, and the people who were killed were more numerous than the people who passed the trial and entered the city. As the line continued moving forward, Anji saw this trial structure. First, there was a closely guarded buffer zone. Very true. Like, it's sad, but it's really well written and very philosophical, but in a way that is down to earth, if that makes sense. I agree. As the line continued moving forward, Anji saw this trial structure. First, there was a closely guarded buffer zone. If the person had already exhibited mutation characteristics distinguishable with the naked eye, the soldiers would shoot them first. After passing the first check, there were 4 judges distributed on the sides the isolation door. Each one had the power of veto and could open fire at any time. So long as they believed this person wasn't human, no matter if their colleagues' judgment were the same or not. The people they killed accounted for approximately 1/4 of all the dead. Being used as a host for spawn was different from being bitten. The process was very slow. Many people's infection characteristics were not very clearly visible. More often, they locked eyes and let the person pass. At that time, that person would walk to the place where the stench of blood was strongest and face the final checkpoint. Lu Feng. His posture was not one where he was sitting solemnly upright or standing straight with hands at his side. As before, he leaned a bit languidly at the bottom of the gate, seeming as though he was carelessly playing with the gun in his hand. It was with that gun that he exercised the highest and final jurisdiction. Another gunshot. He had executed a 12-year-old child whose eyes were still fixed on him after falling. Dude, this guy's got to have like PTSD for his PTSD. Like, I know we covered a bit of that last chapter, but like, he needs boyfriend therapy and then some, and probably medication, like, for his therapy. God. A young judge's complexion was pallid, his throat twitching. He bent over at the waist and tried to suppress his dry heaving. Lu Feng cast a flat glance in that direction. Switch him out. Soldiers carried the judge away, and within the short span of time it took to switch, nobody was tried. Clad in white shirts, the workers of the city affair office came forward and gave each judge a bottle of ice water in which green mint leaves were being soaked. But Lu Feng didn't want one. Less than a minute later, a new judge took the old one's place, and the trial process began anew. Mr. Shaw and Poet pushed and pulled, neither willing to be the first to go forward. In the end, Anji was pushed to the front. The soldiers looked at him and gestured to indicate that he passed, and Anji continued walking forward. 4 judges all locked eyes with him briefly and let him go as well. She walked up to Lu Feng, and the arbiter looked at him with those green eyes of his. Beneath the lamplight, they were slightly darkened and completely lacking in emotion, similar to the day they met for the first time. Anji slightly lowered his gaze. Consequently, it had only been a month since he came to the human base, but it was already the 4th time facing the arbiter's trial. Just this morning, a bug had bitten him on the hand, but apart from some brief strange images flashing through his mind, nothing happened. It's not as if Lu Feng could discern any problem. Just as he had this thought, he saw Lu Feng lift his left hand, then lower it slightly, the gesture indicating that he passed. He sighed in relief and walked in. Lu Feng's clothes and work notebook were still on him, but in this scenario, it was clearly inappropriate to return them to Lu Feng, who was in such a state. He stopped at the passageway entrance. Up ahead were the military's big trucks. If people were to squeeze together in the most space-saving way, a single vehicle could hold 60 or 70 of them. People who passed through the city gates could choose to get in, and after the vehicle filled, the military would take them to the shelters, some vacant residential buildings. If even the vacant residential buildings were filled, they would be assigned to the regular buildings where they would share rooms with the original residents. All in all, there were still places to go. And if the person coming was originally a resident of District 6 or had friends or relatives they were close to in District 6, they could move about on their own. Before a minute had passed, Mr. Shaw and Poet came in one after another as well. Phew, Mr. Shaw said. I lived. It was confirmed that we hadn't been affected when the arbiter rescued us from the City Defense Agency, and along the way, we've been in the car the entire time. Poet said with a smile. Passing was a given. So Shaw cast him a sideline glance. Then who was the one scared to be tried first just now? Poet said, I've forgotten. Mr. Shaw patted Anji on the shoulder. Where's your home? I gotta find a place to sleep. I haven't slept for 2 days. Anji said, I'm not going home. Mr. Shaw frowned. Then what will you do? Anji pointed to the clothes he was wearing. I'm waiting for when he's free, so I can return this to him. I forgot. I can't go to your home, Mr. Shaw patted his head. Never mind, he said. I'll go find my paramour, too. Anji watched his master depart, momentarily unable to understand why he used the word to. You know, why he used the word to. Just real quick, internet's doing okay? I reset it before we started this, so hopefully it'll be fine, but just double checking. Okay, that's good. All right. Then he heard Poet say, Mr. Shaw has run his business in the third underground floor for so many years. At least 90% of the base's pornographic books film originated from his he became Tumblr! It said that when he was young, he had countless lovers. Anji discovered that it seemed his master was truly very famous. He asked, You all know him? The base is only so big, Poet said with a smile. Who doesn't know what Mr. Shaw does? However, after he got older, he wasn't so prolific anymore, Poet said. Speaking of the third floor, I thought of Duce again. You've seen her before, right? Duce was the most beautiful woman in the outer city. Anji nodded. Poet sighed. I don't know where she is right now. If she's dead, I'd feel very sorry. Anji said nothing. Poet had been locked up in prison, so of course he didn't know that the mistress of the black market's third floor had already died in the breeding season's prelude. But upon seeing Poet's slightly listless expression, Anji suddenly understood something. Person would feel grief at the death of another person, and this was an emotion that humans alone had. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why humans were more afraid of death compared to other creatures. You're showing that expression again, Poet said. Anji softly asked, What? Everything that happens here has nothing to do with you. You seem to only be watching. Poet rested an elbow on Anji's shoulders, and with facetiousness in his tone, he said gently, You seem to either be observing us or taking pity on us. Earlier, there was a second in which I felt some sort of divinity from you. Anji blinked, not quite understanding. Perhaps he was indeed unlike humans. He was a xenogenic, after all. It's gone now. Poet blew into his ears. Now you're like a little simpleton. She was speechless. Poet patted his shoulder. I'm leaving too. Where are you going? Anji asked. Wherever, I suppose, Poet said. City Defense Agency is too busy to control me, so I'm going to break out of prison. He smiled at Anji. Goodbye. Anji watched his receding figure vanish into the boundless night. Poet was a prisoner the City Defense Agency had locked up. Where he could go without a communicator or an ID card, Anji didn't know. Perhaps he'll go find his boyfriend, Anji thought. Or perhaps he'll go find other people to tell the story of the base's establishment to, and then after no more than 3 days, the City Defense Agency will take him away again. After Poet left, only Anji remained standing at the base of the wall alone. It was an open space, and he wasn't the only person standing there. There were still many people milling about and talking nearby, and some people had gathered in the distance as well. But he didn't know what they were doing. The temporarily erected isolation barrier was low and translucent, so he could see Lu Feng's back view from here. The aurora twisted and fluctuated in the sky. Every night, the color of the sky was different from the previous night. Corpses were being continuously dragged away from the city gates, but the people entering were few in number. Gunshots and death seemed to be the only things that were eternal. The turbulent night wind blew in with the stench of blood. Anji could not see Lu Feng's expression. He only felt that such a back view was very good-looking and very lonely. Person would feel grief at another person's death. So would the Arbiter feel grief for the people he killed? Perhaps he had already gotten used to it. Footsteps came from behind him. How come you're here? It was a familiar voice. Anji turned around and saw it was the young judge who was often at Lu Feng's side. He was holding a bottle of mint water, his complexion poor, but the expression on his face was still very gentle. You aren't going back? Anji nodded. I wanted to return the colonel's things to him. He took off the coat. Can you pass this on for me? The judge smiled slightly. You won't wait for him? Anji thought that he had only worn the colonel's coat once, yet everyone seemed to tacitly recognize that they had some sort of relationship. The colonel and I, we aren't that very well acquainted. I know. The judge's reply was outside his expectations. It's just that I haven't seen the colonel with other people before. Held out. The judge's reply was outside his expectations. It's just that I haven't seen the colonel with other people before. Held out his hands. Give it to me. Duranji confirmed that the work notebook and ballpoint pen were both there. He folded the coat in a simple manner and handed it over. The judge accepted it with both hands, and his pretty eyelashes dropped slightly. The colonel has been working for a very long time already. Are you really not going to wait for him? He murmured. Right at that moment, the aurora up in the sky abruptly changed, lighting up the sky and the earth like a flash of lightning. Ji's heart thudded, and an irresistible intuition came over him. Unable to hold back, he looked at the city gates and Lu Feng's figure, that tall yet lonely figure in the night. Suddenly realized if he left now, he would not have any connection whatsoever with this person for the rest of his life. He once again grabbed the coat. The judge looked at him. I'll wait for him, Anji said. The judge. Good. Thank you. I'm glad it's still good, even now. All right. Okay. I'll wait for him, Anji said. The judge gently smiled at him, unfolded the coat, and draped it over him once more. Thank you. Anji looked back at Lu Feng's figure. In just the span of their conversation, Lu Feng had killed 2 more people. He asked, when will he rest? I don't know, the judge said. Perhaps in another 2 or 3 hours. Thank you, Anji said. But he heard the judge ask, how did you get to know the colonel? Anji thought back. At the city gates, I suppose. Skipped over the matter of his spore. He suspected I wasn't human, so he took me to have a genetic examination done, and I passed it. The judge raised his eyebrows. Anji continued, afterwards, he arrested me. The judge's eyes curved as he smiled. I know. To make that kind of thing, you guys are really daring. Oh, he knew about the sex doll, huh? I kind of wonder how many people actually know, like, what went down, or if since he's, like, his aide, he knew about the sex doll. Because I have a feeling it might come up as a joke, but we'll have to see. Anji was speechless. Then, it was at the Civil Defense Agency. I'm a bit afraid of the cold, so he lent me his room for the night. Anji continued, counting on his fingers. And then my friends and I were trapped in a room and didn't know what to do. So I called him, and now we're here. After he finished, he asked, in normal times, does the colonel also frequently help others? If that was the case, then Lu Feng was indeed a good person. I don't know. There are no others at his side, the judge said. That's sad. After a while, he spoke again. Sometimes I also want to protect some people, but I don't have the opportunity, for no one seeks help from the trial court. Anji pursed his lips and said, You're very kind. And added, You don't seem like a judge. This judge's temperament, even amongst all the people he had seen, could be considered a very gentle one. The judge smiled. Many people say so. Perhaps only people like the colonel are qualified. It seems so, Anji said. Thought that perhaps Lu Feng's cold temperament was precisely the reason why he was able to make the most accurate judgments. This year is the 7th year that the colonel has worked for the trial court, the judge said. Having to judge the true species of those things who are Having to judge the true species of those things who are no different from humans on the surface is truly the most difficult thing in the world to do. Sometimes there will be mistakes, and sometimes there will be accidental killings. When a judge passes judgment, the arbiter can tell him whether or not he was correct. But as for the arbiter himself, there is no one who can tell him if he was right or wrong. What he has to fight against are unimaginable giant monsters, hidden xenogenics, others' doubts, along with himself. That's why I think that, other than his indifference, there are some things that have supported the arbiter in his past 7 years at the trial court, the judge said. I hope you can understand him. This judge always turned the conversation topic towards Lu Feng. Anji saw right through him. But then he saw the judge frown slightly and look somewhere within the walls, not far in front of them. A lot of people were concentrated there, even more than earlier. She had assumed that it was residents from within the city walls who had come to gawk at the spectacle, but their expressions were all very solemn, like they had come to participate in a large-scale gathering. They were talking, but their voices were very soft. Anji only heard a few scant words. Scale. Frightening. 4,000 people. Begin. He saw the judge next to him frown and gesture to the distant guards. A team of guards walked over, and right when they did, the people who had gathered at the base of the wall dispersed. There were hundreds of them, and their scale seemed even more massive after they had dispersed. Furthermore, newcomers continuously walked out from the city to join them. Amidst the crowd, someone waved, and Anji confirmed that this wave was directed at him. He looked over. It was a familiar young face, the person who had brought him to Building 117 on the first day he came to the human base. At the time, they were demonstrating. Ji suddenly knew what the people had come to do, and he looked at them with wide eyes. The first person took a folded piece of white paper out from his clothes and unfolded it. On the white paper, the words "Oppose the arbiter's brutality" were written in big red letters. Then someone next to him also unfolded their own paper that said, "Publicize the trial regulations now. Please publish the trial criteria. Refuse a repeat of Judgment Day. Give an explanation to the dead. Reject unjustified murder. Refuse maintaining the base's safety via indiscriminate killing. Requesting regular assessments of the arbiter's mental state. To the trial court. Please take responsibility for the base's population loss rate. Current arbiter's kill rate far surpasses his predecessors. Please give the base an explanation." Beneath the aurora, these white papers unfolded like flowers. They converged, resembling a silently flowing ocean with a pallid white as the ocean's main color and the blood-red words as its billowing spray. The people outside the walls started moving. Stretch out their necks, their gazes passing through the translucent isolation walls to clearly see the situation on the other side. Silent atmosphere was suddenly broken by this change, and they began to quietly talk amongst themselves. But Anji looked towards the city gates. At the city gates, Lu Feng's figure moved slightly, turning so that he was looking into the city. It was just an ordinary look, as if he had seen nothing at all. He turned around, loaded his gun, and pressed the trigger. Yet another person, a short-haired girl, fell in a pool of blood. If Anji did not misremember, that was the 11th person in a row that Lu Feng had killed. It was the 12th person's turn now. A man with bronze-toned skin, he looked back and forth between Lu Feng, the judges, and the deep pool of blood on the ground with a frightened gaze, and didn't step forward for a long time. Gun-carrying soldiers came forward to herd him along. His facial muscles twitched as he stared at the crowd demonstrating in place across from him. Finally, he gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and sat on the ground. "I'm not going!" This movement greatly roused the demonstrating crowd within the walls, and they held their poster even higher. Outside the walls, a second person sat down, and a third, then a fourth. As though a powerful current swept through, within 5 short minutes they all sat down like toppled dominoes. Nobody spoke, and not a single person stepped into the trial area. As the aurora fluctuated wildly in the sky, they silently looked at Lu Feng standing in the middle, expressing their resistance with their refusal to cooperate. In front was the trial. and behind were the insect swarms. Sitting here, it seemed like they could resist everything in front and behind, and thus obtain eternal life. But Lu Feng's expression didn't change at all. Oh, hey, sorry. Sorry about that. But Lu Feng's expression didn't change at all. His eyelashes lowered slightly as he bowed his head and loaded a new magazine into his gun. This man's slightly slanted eyebrows and long eyes naturally possessed an upwards curve. Normal times, they were forceful, but when his gaze was lowered, these arcs seemed to take on a cold disdain and scorn. With the soft click, the magazine was loaded. He said, "Bring him forward." Soldiers of the City Defense Agency hesitated briefly. Only after the scene was at a standstill for a full 10 seconds did two soldiers step forward and roughly pick up the first man who sat down. Lu Feng slowly lifted the gun. Everyone's gazes landed on them. A woman's broken sobs came from amidst the crowd, and then the sobbing spread like a virus to form a vast ocean of mournful cries. No place was free of crying. It was as though what they were about to face was not a trial, but rather a massacre. Perhaps the intrinsic nature of Judgment Day was a massacre. It was the same the first time 100 years ago, and it was the same 100 years after. Sound of armored vehicles broke the tense atmosphere. Howard, who had brought a team of guards with him, got out of a vehicle and asked Lu Feng, "What's going on?" Feng's voice was expressionless. "The residents are refusing to cooperate." Howard looked around, frowned deeply, and said with a slightly critical tone, "Lu Feng, aren't you killing too many?" Lu Feng's intonation did not change, but his voice was slightly hoarse. "No." "Today's situation is urgent." Howard's aide handed him a loudspeaker and he said to the residents, "This is related to the safety of the base. Large-scale infection may occur at any time, so please cooperate with the trial court, City Defense Agency's work." Nobody moved. Perhaps between the infection that may break out at any time and the muzzle of the arbiter's gun in front of them, the latter was more frightening. It was obvious that Howard had also noted everyone's silence. After his gaze passed over the demonstration banners, he thought briefly and said, "Let's both take a step back. Trial court will make public the detailed regulations of the trials, and the residents will once again enter the trial process." "Howard," Lu Feng stated in a flat voice. Screams suddenly burst out from the crowd. As the muzzle of Lu Feng's gun had slowly turned to point at Howard. "Uh-oh." Initially stunned, Howard then furrowed his brows and said, "Colonel Liu, what are you doing?" Howard's guards all took a step forward, loaded their guns, and aimed at Lu Feng. A stalemate. Howard let out a cold laugh. "Colonel Liu, I've been outside the entire day, but I swear I haven't come into contact with a single bug." "You've been infected," Lu Feng said. "I understand that the trial court wishes to take control of the City Defense Agency as does not wish to make public the detailed regulations of the trials." Her voice was grim. "But this is the juncture of whether the base survives or perishes, Colonel Liu. May abuse your power, but there has to be a limit." As soon as he spoke those words, the crowd promptly became restless. Lu Feng put his finger on the trigger. He didn't say a single word, but his movements made clear what he wanted to do. It was the same with the City Defense Agency guards. Movements were bigger. Obviously, so long as Lu Feng opened fire on the director Howard, they would also wildly shoot him down right away. A death-like silence spread out and condensed like ice. In the suffocating silence, someone within the walls shouted, "Oppose the arbiter's tyranny!" This rallying cry received a multitude of responses. Everyone, those inside the walls, those outside of the walls, those who were already there, those who had newly arrived, shouted this slogan as well. "Oppose the arbiter's tyranny! Oppose the arbiter's tyranny! Oppose the arbiter's tyranny!" The voices came in waves that were each louder than the last, but Lu Feng, in the middle of it all, did not move from beginning to end. As Anji looked at Lu Feng's back view, he nearly forgot to breathe. His understanding of Lu Feng was not deep, but based on just this shallow understanding, he knew that Lu Feng would really open fire. Alright. He would really open fire. He would die. The young judge next to him also murmured, "Don't." The aurora abruptly jittered, and the atmosphere was as cold as ice. Right at that moment, an ear-piercing whistle tore through the heavy night and covered up the people's shouts. White light suddenly appeared on the distant road, continuously flickering as it approached, and the crowd all avoided it. A white mechanical car with a red triangle painted on its body speedily approached with a roar. When it came near, the door opened and a young man dressed in a white coat stuck his upper half out the window. And she recognized him. The city gates 1 month prior, it was this doctor who had performed his genetic examination. "I'm the head of the Lighthouse's inspection division." Holding a loudspeaker, he took a few hurried breaths. "First-generation genetic coupling agent was successfully deployed an hour ago. It can achieve rapid imaging of target spots, and it only needs 5 minutes." He panted, out of breath. Nobody moved. He hopped out of the car and hastily ran over. At the entrance, he twisted open a disposable syringe and walked forward. "Director Howard, you would be so kind as to cooperate?" Howard calmly rolled up the sleeves of his all-encompassing protective military uniform and allowed his blood to be drawn, then looked at Lu Feng with a frown. Everyone else looked at Lu Feng as well. Anji knew they were waiting for one particular result. The result that Howard's genetic examination was normal, so as to prove the arbiter indeed killed indiscriminately. "Thank you. I told you I'm coming down with a cold." I hope this is coming across clear enough. All right. Amongst the demonstrators behind him, someone said, "We're about to change history." Anji saw Lu Feng lower his gun and expressionlessly wipe down his gun while leaning against the wall, seeming to not care about anything. What was he thinking about? Anji thought. 3 minutes later, having finished wiping down his gun, Lu Feng clipped it to his waist again and scanned the crowd with a dispassionate gaze. Anji looked at him, and perhaps that was a moment in which their gazes met for a brief fraction of a second. Anji promptly slid closer to the judge to make his own position clear. Feng's lips seemed to curl up into a smile, but Anji didn't see clearly because the man turned back to in the following second. 1 minute left. The demonstrating crowd became increasingly riotous, holding animated discussions amongst themselves. Half a minute. 10 seconds. They began counting the seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light atop the detection car was decisive. The ominous alarm sound had extremely high penetrative power as it abruptly sounded, "Alert!" The crowd was plunged into a deathly silence for several seconds. Bang! A gunshot rang out. There was no need for Lu Feng to take action, for the guards of the city gate had opened fire. A silence spread out through the city, for nobody spoke. In the end, the doctor said, "Colonel." Without saying a word, Lu Feng turned and walked towards the interior of the city. He walked straight past everyone, including Anji. The silent crowd seemed like frozen wooden puppets, only reacting once he walked near them. They slowly parted to form a path. The view of his figure in Anji's eyes overlapped with his figure when he had turned and left the city gates that day. Ji had only seen him turn and leave, but never walk towards anyone. The judge suddenly nudged Anji with an elbow. Anji promptly came to a realization. Holding Lu Feng's work notebook, he chased after Lu Feng. The arbiter was tall and had long legs, so he could only catch up by jogging. "Colonel." Lu Feng didn't reply. "Colonel, please wait." Lu Feng still didn't reply. "Colonel." Anji took a few breaths. He didn't have much strength in the first place, and now that he had run, his voice had been affected by becoming softer. He frowned as he said, "Slow down a bit. I can't keep up." Colonel stopped and turned to look at him. Anji still hadn't caught his breath when he lifted his head. "Colonel." "Speak properly," Lu Feng said coldly with a glance at him. "Don't whine." Anji was at a loss for words. "Oh, hey! Kiri Signori. Welcome. I'm glad you could make it. And thankfully, we haven't been having buffer issues, and we just arrived at Chapter 12. So, fingers crossed. I'm going to take a quick sip, and then we will get started on Chapter 12. Also, thank you for coming. All right. Chapter 12. Although you aren't of much use, you can go and take care of children. As a person who has worked in childcare before, there's part of me that slightly resents that. Like, just a bit. Just a little bit. All right. I didn't, Anji said in a small voice. Yeah, he's saying, I didn't whine. He handed the work notebook to Lu Feng, who frowned slightly and accepted it. And the clothes. He took off the coat and handed that to Lu Feng as well. Thank you. Lu Feng draped the garment over the crook of his elbow and lowered his head to look at Anji. There was no need to wait for me, he said. You should have just left it at the city gate. Anji didn't reply. He and Lu Feng locked eyes for a few seconds before he carefully asked, Are you okay? Feng looked away. I'm okay. His voice was flat, as if nothing had happened earlier. Oh, Anji said. Then Anji continued to ask, Where are you going? Lu Feng looked at him. That pair of incisive, cold green eyes always made Anji think of chilly things. The addition of the mildly cold wind of the city at night, he, who had just left the warm coat, curled up on himself slightly. Lu Feng dropped the coat back in Anji's arms. I don't know, he said. I'll escort you back first. Yeah, I agree. Holding the garment, Anji once again draped it over himself. After he put it on, Lu Feng walked ahead, and he followed. To either side of them was the road formed by the parted protesters. Their expressions were solemn, for the corners of their mouths taut and downturned. They still had not put down the posters and pamphlets in their hands. The papers flapped noisily as they were blown about by the night wind. Every single person stared at them silently, their stances tense. The green, purple, and orange aurora shone on their faces, mixing with their skin tones to form a strange metallic tint. From those eyes, Anji saw distinct hatred and cautious vigilance. If it weren't for their misgivings regarding the gun Lu Feng carried at all times, and his privilege of killing people at any time, they seemed like they would be able to do anything. The same eyes landed on Anji as well, and it could even be said that most of them were looking at him. Anji involuntarily drew closer to Lu Feng. He knew why Lu Feng wanted to escort him back now. Voluntarily approached the arbiter, so the dissenters stared at him like a pack of wolves. Fortunately, although the size of the crowd was not small, it could not be considered large when compared to the entire city. In less than 5 minutes, they passed through the demonstration area and stepped onto the residential district's road. That's still a decent amount if you're walking for 5 minutes of people. I'm just saying. The aurora made the numerous buildings of the residential district cast heavy dark black shadows onto the ground, and the light gray cement road was broken into black and gray stripes by the lights and shadows. Lu Feng's and Anji's shadows were also cast onto the ground, elongated and overlapping with those irregular stripes. Anji didn't know what he should say to Lu Feng, and Lu Feng didn't take the initiative to speak up either. Although it was nighttime, this place was by no means quiet. One of the military's big trucks roared past them before coming to a stop at the fork in the road. The vehicle door opened, and the residents who came in through the city gate to seek shelter were released and led into the building and settled in place by a team of soldiers and a staff member of the city affair office, who was clad in a white shirt and holding a notebook. A man asked a soldier, "How long do we have to take shelter for?" The soldier said, "It depends on the situation." Another resident asked, "I heard only District 6 is okay. Can you ensure District 6 will always be safe?" The soldier said, "There's no definitive information. Wait for the lighthouse's research report." Then someone still wanted to ask something but was promptly interrupted by the soldier. "Everyone come with me. Hurry." Disorderly footsteps sounded as they entered the building. Anji lifted his head to look at the number on the upper right part of the building. This was Building 55. Lu Feng's footsteps didn't stop, so he didn't stop either. They walked another 30 meters, not 30 minutes, sorry. Arrived at Building 56. Number 56. Something in Anji's heart was touched, and he lifted his head to look at the number, then looked at the pitch-black unit door in the middle of the building. This area was very close to the isolation gate, and the military had already begun settling people in Building 55, so they would very soon turn to Building 56. Lu Feng asked, "You wish to go?" Anji shook his head. Lu Feng's tone of voice was forthright. "Go if you want to." Anji said nothing. He suspected that the arbiter and the judges had received mind-reading training. He said, "Let's go then." Lu Feng changed directions and walked towards Building 56. Anji walked right next to him, and as he walked, he pulled out an ID card from his pocket. A string of numbers was printed on the card. 3260563209, presenting Building 56, Unit 3, Floor 2, Number 09. This wasn't Anji's room, and nor was this ID card his. It had belonged to Vance, the man who brought him to the northern base. That day, after Vance's body had been carried away, the soldiers gave this ID card to Anji to serve as a memento. He carried it on him at all times ever since then. That's kind of sweet. Like, it kind of reminds me of like dog tags, honestly. Except these dog tags go to an apartment. Sorry, hang on. Okay. Anji swiped the ID card to open the room door. It was not yet invalid, which indicated that the base had not yet taken back the right to use this room. He walked in and turned on the light. It was a simple room, and the quilt was carelessly heaped on the bed, as if its owner had just gotten up and left. Some daily necessities, a water cup, cigarette case, and lighter, were placed on the table. This was Vance's home. It had already been a month since Vance died, but Anji would sometimes think of him. This entire time, he did not understand why, despite being fully aware that he may have been infected, Vance still chose to return to the base. But on this day, after witnessing the deaths and terror of so many people when he passed Building 56 again, felt that he understood Vance in some sense. He himself was dominated by instinct, dead set on risking death by going deep into the base to search for his spore. Perhaps it was impossible for humans to agree with his motivation. But unlike monsters, which were dominated by instinct, humans were a kind of creature often dominated by emotion. They did things that did not conform to common sense or need, to many reasons, so as long as he understood this, he wouldn't doubt humans' baffling behavior. As Anji thought this, he gently placed the ID card beneath the cigarette case. He remembered that Vance liked smoking. After doing so, he turned to leave. Lu Feng leaned against the door frame, waiting for him. His gaze was akin to a falling snowflake as it landed on Anji, seemingly different from before. Anji asked, "What's the matter?" "I subjectively believe you're human now." Lu Feng turned and walked out. Anji silently caught up, not wishing to make any sound. As expected, the arbiter had constantly, continuously, always suspected he wasn't human. When they got back onto the road, Lu Feng's communicator rang and the doctor's voice came from within. "The detector has been incorporated into the trial process at the city gate, and the residents' emotions have been placated to a certain extent. The lighthouse will transfer 5 more instructments tomorrow, but their speed is still somewhat unable to keep up. Colonel, you may still need to return." "I know." Lu Feng's voice was cold. "I'll go back in the daytime." "Thank you. Rest well tonight." The doctor paused. "Now that Director Howard is dead, what will happen next? The outer city, you are the only colonel with executive power remaining. City Defense Agency's colonel is a civilian, and the distribution of emergency supplies alone is enough to make him lose all of his hair. The trial court will temporarily take control of the City Defense Agency, and all troops will be assigned to rescue work. For the time being," Lu Feng said. "After Judgment Day ends, I hope the lighthouse can assist us in formulating a plan to restart the various dispensers." Doctor said, "Of course." Wu Feng hung up and then dialed another number and made work arrangements for the trial court. Ji quietly listened with his ears perked up. The arbiter's words were clear and concise as always. His tone of voice was cold and methodical as always. Many things happened that night, but Lu Feng still seemed to remain as that Lu Feng. Anji turned to look at his profile. According to the doctor's words, this person still had to return to the city gate tomorrow. The man himself also tacitly agreed to return. That young judge had said that what the colonel was fighting against were unimaginable great monsters. Perhaps Lu Feng was already used to it. The only unnatural thing he did that night was turn and leave the place. Once the phone call ended, they arrived at building 117. Lu Feng seemed to be even more familiar with the road than him, and the two of them arrived at the door to number 14 without issue. After turning on the light, everything inside was as usual, save for one thing missing from next to the wall. But even if Anji was given the bravery of 10 men, he didn't dare to ask where the mannequin was now after being confiscated. Okay, he won't ask, but now I'm curious. Anji asked Lu Feng, who was standing at the door, "Would you like to come in and sit down?" "No need," Lu Feng said. "You go and rest." Anji hesitated for a while before asking, "Then, where are you going?" After a brief period of contemplation, he said, "I don't know." Communicator screen showed that it was already 11 o'clock at night. Ji counted the hours and came to the conclusion that the colonel may not have rested for nearly 40 hours already. Oof. That's rough, buddy. He knew that today's incident was urgent and that many things were Lu Feng's and Howard's temporary assignments. They tried their best to settle the residents in District 6, those, such as the soldiers and the staff of the trial court and city defense agency, may temporarily not have offices or residence, or perhaps they were only simple arrangements for them to rest and spend the night, the residential district near the city. But he felt that the current Lu Feng may not necessarily wish to return to the city gate. Anji felt very conflicted. His fingers involuntarily clenched and he pursed his lips. "What is it?" Lu Feng asked. His voice was a bit soft, and the corridor light was very dim. Perhaps, as an effect of the lighting, its contours were not as forceful and fierce as usual. Ji steeled himself. Even if it was for the sake of his spore, he had to establish a better relationship with the colonel. It's just for the spore, huh, buddy? Right. If you don't have anywhere to go, Anji said, lifting his head to look at Lu Feng, you can stay here at my place. Ooh. Hang on. I'm sorry. Tea is the best. Okay. To humans, it was very difficult to take back words that they had spoken. So this was how things turned out. In the public bathroom on the 5th floor, next to a sink that was covered in brown water scale marks, in front of a faucet. Yeah, they really are cute. It's like, it's just for my spore, I swear. It's just my spore. In the public bathroom on the 5th floor, next to a sink that was covered in brown water scale marks, in front of a faucet, Anji held up a cup in one hand and a toothbrush in the other as he earnestly washed up. He understood the daily living habits of humans and earnestly imitated them every day. But today, his attitude was even more careful than normal because the colonel was right next to him. After finishing, he continued cautiously putting everything away and looked at Lu Feng. Lu Feng had just washed his face with cold water, and a few crystal clear drops of water hung from the tips of his damp hair, just like beads of freshly melted snow. Anji silently handed him the towel. Lu Feng accepted it with a terse word of thanks. You're welcome, Anji said. He believed that what he did conformed to human etiquette, for sharing things was something humans commonly did. He held out his cup to Lu Feng. Do you want to use it? He asked. But there's only one. The base was short of materials, so there were limits on the daily necessities allocated to each person. If there was an additional need, one would have to go to the black market and buy it on their own. Anji only had one cup and one toothbrush. Furthermore, the black market no longer existed, so there was nowhere he could go to buy more. Indirect kisses! Lu Feng's eyes were fixed on him, and only after looking for approximately 5 or 6 seconds did he move. Anji lowered his head. The dim yellow light of the bathroom cast a pale golden hue on the rim of the cup, and Lu Feng grasped the china-white handle with slim fingers, taking the cup from his hand. His right hand was the one that held his gun, so there was a slight callus on the pad of his finger. When Anji let go, his fingers gently came into contact. Lu Feng didn't use his toothbrush. He used the cup to hold water, then rinsed his mouth with a mixture of liquid and toothpaste. Afterwards, he put away the cup, and the two of them walked out. It was 11 o'clock at night. If it were normal times, the bathroom and corridor's water and electricity would have been cut off in accordance with the base's rules. The entirety of District 6 had entered a state of emergency shelter today, so the water and electricity restrictions were all canceled. In a state of trepidation, a number of people hadn't slept. And because of this, although it was late at night, there were other people in the bathroom. Those few people washed either themselves or their clothes while casting surreptitious glances at the two of them. Anji noticed, and he knew Lu Feng definitely noticed as well, but the colonel didn't seem to care too much. Anji walked in front. Bathroom floor was damp and had a few puddles, so he had to walk with his head down to avoid those spots. They walked to the doorway. A black figure unexpectedly came from the corner up ahead. Anji lifted his head. You! It was Josh's voice. Anji unconsciously took a step back and bumped into Lu Feng's chest. He saw Josh looking at him, wanting to say something, but with a shift of his gaze, he froze in place. Ji had also become half frozen. Josh just happened to block the door, and he was neither going in nor out. At that moment, he felt a slight weight on his shoulder, for Lu Feng's fingers had come to rest there. Josh's eyes were wide open, and Anji could practically see his pupils jitter. Then Josh ducked his head, took a step back, and turned sideways, giving way with a deferential posture. Feng exerted a little bit of effort with his hand on Anji's shoulder and steered Anji out the door before letting go. All of it happened within the span of a moment. Anji's heart thudded wildly, and his whole body was tensed up, for fear that in front of the arbiter Josh would call out Anzi, or say, "He's not like Anzi," or some such. However, even after they walked more than 10 steps away, Josh hadn't said a word. Anji turned back to look at Josh's profile. Josh's fingers, which hung at their sides, was clenched around the hem of his shirt, and the corners of his mouth were taut. Anji suddenly realized something. In this place, what the arbiter held was authority over people's life and death. Therefore, the vast majority of people in the base, including Josh, were afraid to even say a word to the arbiter. They walked through the corridor and returned to the room. Lu Feng didn't ask him just who that was, nor exactly what entanglements were between him and Josh. Strictly speaking, apart from staying overnight in each other's quarters, he and Lu Feng could only be considered strangers after a while. Yep. Mr. Shaw and his sassy sass advice, yes, he definitely would agree. After returning to the room, Lu Feng sat down at Anji's desk, opened his work notebook, and began to take notes. He wrote very quickly, and on the line for 619, he wrote, "Judgment Day. Countless dead." Standing to one side, Anji watched him and once again pondered a question. What exactly was the purpose of such a work notebook? He said, "You write so little." Lu Feng closed the notebook. "It's to satisfy inspection." His tone of voice was very matter-of-fact. "Oh," Anji said. Then he said, "I'm going to change my clothes." Lu Feng replied. Anzi changed out of his daytime clothes. He had a very soft white cotton nightgown. After changing, he burrowed under the quilt and slept on the side of the bed closer to the wall. Although the base's room only had a standard single bed, the bed was by no means narrow. He could even roll over on it. Anji guessed that this may have been because the base had many hulking mercenaries who took up a lot of space. He really was the OG. You're right, Mars Rover. Therefore, after he lay down, this bed was more than enough space to accommodate another person. After he settled in, he looked at Lu Feng and said, "I'm good now." He discovered that Lu Feng was looking at the Supply Depot exam guidebook on the desk. Feng said, "You wish to go to the Supply Depot?" Anji said. It was a pity that it seemed like he'd never be able to go. The outer city was going to be constantly be occupied by bugs. "Go to the city affairs office tomorrow afternoon," Lu Feng said. "Past few years there have been many newborns and not enough manpower in the main city, so the city defense agency has been tasked with recruiting people from the outer city." As he spoke, he got up from the chair and took off his coat and draped it on the chair back before walking towards Anji. Anji knew that those green eyes were examining him. Then he heard Lu Feng continue. "Although you aren't of much use otherwise, you can go and take care of children." There it is. There's the title drop. Anji wanted to refute his statement, but he discovered that he actually had no way of doing so. Feeling very embarrassed, he covered himself up with the quilt. He heard Lu Feng let out a laugh. Then the side of the bed dipped down as Lu Feng got in. The chilly scent was very close, and he could hear the sound of Lu Feng's breathing. The things that happened today were like a dream. As a xenogenic, he was about to spend a night with the arbiter. "So," Anji murmured as he peeked out from under the quilt. Do you still suspect I'm objectively not a human? You passed the genetic examination and the 30-day observation period. Liu Feng's face was expressionless. You're a human objectively as well now. What's the observation period? After being infected, within 30 days, those who have been infected will definitely lose their human mind, and the probability is infinitely close to 1. Oh. I wonder if that bug bite's gonna come in. Then, would there be xenogenics who don't lose their minds? Unji asked tentatively. Although they're xenogenics, they still have a human shape and thoughts. Just have an additional ability being able to change into other living creatures. He knew that he was a xenogenic, but he also knew that he was still quite lucid. Do you truly think humans' willpower is very strong? Lu Feng said. Anji didn't know how to reply, but it seemed that Lu Feng didn't need him to reply. It's actually not worth mentioning. The lighthouse has performed many experiments, Lu Feng said. Humans will not surmount xenogenic survival instinct. In contrast, xenogenics gradually digest humans' thinking ability and use it for their own survival. Take today's bugs, for example. The Lighthouse's investigation report has not come out yet, but I unilaterally believe they were premeditated attacks. Anji slowly opened his eyes wide. This was the first time Lu Feng had spoken for so long. The weight of his words were very heavy. He said that the specific will that made humans human was not worth mentioning in the face of gene fusion, and that humans were such a weak sort of creature. I think that's not right. After being thought of as human both subjectively and objectively by the Arbiter, Anji felt much more at ease. At the very least, he dared to talk with Lu Feng a little more. If their willpower was very strong, doesn't depend on strength there is no if. Anji frowned and thought hard. For example, if you were infected, Lu Feng promptly covered him up with a quilt. I would immediately commit suicide, Lu Feng said coldly. Go to sleep. Anji thought that the Arbiter may have become drowsy and was no longer willing to talk nonsense with him. In fact, he himself was sleepy as well. Although, altogether, Lu Feng hadn't rested for 40 hours, and he himself had only slept 2 or 3 more hours early yesterday morning in Lu Feng's room. Virtually the moment he closed his eyes, he passed out. When Anji woke up again, he was momentarily unsure what time it was. He sat up from the bed. The entire room was still like how it was last night, with only a faint ray of light coming through the gap between the curtains, like weak sunlight penetrating through the abyss's layered plant branches and leaves. After pulling open the curtains, the room was still very dim, for it was overcast outside. He took the communicator and looked at it. It was already 11 a.m.? Suddenly, Anji felt that he had forgotten something. With a start, he woke up completely, and he first looked at the bed. There was nothing at all, only him alone, and the same could be said for the room. Then, he discovered a piece of paper lying flat on the table, and next to the paper was a ballpoint pen. There's that ballpoint pen! Okay. Anji got out of bed and came to the table, then picked it up. It was the Oppose the Arbiter's Brutality leaflet, then flipped over, and a few words were written on the back of it. Black. I've left. Call if anything comes up. Blue. For some reason, Anji smiled. Thought that Lu Feng's note was just like the man's work notebook, concisely worded. After putting down the note, he came to the wardrobe and began picking out clothes to wear to the city affairs office. Thought for a good long time, and in the end, he finally took out a gray sweater and changed into it. Gray. Anji lifted his head and looked outside. The sky and the light in the sky were both light gray and very low, hanging on the tops of the buildings. Thick gray clouds gathered in clumps and extended to the ends of the city, the horizon. It looked like it was about to rain heavily. Anji felt very happy, for mushrooms liked rainy days. That's cute. Moreover, Lu Feng told him the piece of information yesterday, so assuming he could pass the City Defense Agency's recruitment, could go to the main city. That was where the lighthouse was. He seemed to have gotten one step closer to getting his spore back. He decided to not quibble over the matter of Lu Feng digging out his spore anymore. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 12, but it's only been like an hour and a half. Let me see how long chapter 13 is. If it's a short one, I will read chapter 13. Okay. I will read chapter 13 because it is the last chapter. It's short, but it's sorry about the click. I took the thing off the filter. So it's a short chapter, but it also brings us to book 2, Roses. Which, come on. Rosebud reads, Roses. We're going to do it. Okay, so you're in for a treat. You get an extra chapter tonight. Okay. Alright. I need to blow my nose and I need some tea. Then we're doing chapter 13. Woohoo! Extra chapter. I'll have to change it on the title once I'm done. But that's okay. I don't mind. Yes. I did it without even trying, just because I'm so amazing. Okay. Chapter 13. What would happen next? Ambiguous. Alright. At the top of the street's utility pole, the broadcasting equipment repeatedly played the robotic female's voice announcement. At present, District 6 has sufficient materials. Water and electricity will be supplied as usual. The City Defense Agency has implemented real-time omnidirectional protection of the ultrasonic disperser. According to the observatory, I can't say it in the robot voice. According to the observatory, there it is, the weather will turn overcast and there will be a high probability of rainfall. Residents, please shut your doors and windows and cut down on travel. The City Defense Agency's personnel screening of the entire base has begun. Residents who meet the requirements, please go to the City Affairs Office as quickly as possible. The following are the personnel selection requirements. This was the only sound on the entire street apart from that of Anji's footsteps. After the incident happened at the base, the city gates were sealed off with nobody allowed in or out, and the various districts were paralyzed. The atmosphere in District 6 was likewise tense. On the way to the City Affairs Office, it was deserted everywhere, with only the Oppose the Arbiter's Code pamphlets that had been sparsely pasted on the building walls drifting around on the ground after being blown off by the wind. After walking a while longer, he noticed the military's armored vehicles passing by on the road from time to time, their speed extremely fast, all driving in the direction of the entrance. The base was divided into 8 districts altogether. The distribution center, the City Defense Agency, the trial court together ensured safety within the city. The City Affairs Office and supply depots managed the city's general affairs. Just like how the trial court was located at the city gates, the City Defense Agency headquarters were located in District 5, and the dispersion center was located in District 1. The City Affairs Office's headquarters were established in District 6. It was fortunate that this was the case, for the City Affairs Office had no casualties, maintained normal operations, and even could recruit people. Oh my gosh, I was stumbling in that paragraph. The City Affairs Office was located in the center of District 6, with its back to the train station and the alarm towers next to it. The main building was 7 stories high, with a spacious office hall in the middle. Right now, the sky was entirely overcast. Although it was clearly noontime, the atmosphere was as gloomy as 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. The dark clouds seemed like they were on the verge of drenching the city affairs office building. It wasn't until after walking into the large hall that Anji finally felt the aura of living people. There were 500 or 600 people divided into 2 long lines, all young faces. The recruitment requirements were constantly repeated over the broadcast, and Anji heard it as well. They had to be between 18 and 25 years old, free of disease and disability, and have no criminal records or records of inappropriate political views. Regarding that point, he pondered for a long time. Although he had been imprisoned, he had only received a verbal guilty verdict from Lu Feng. So perhaps there had not been time for it to be entered into the system yet. And after meeting the basic conditions, there were additional requirements. Civilian candidates had to have completed at least 3 of the base's basic education courses. Non-civilian candidates had to have been awarded more than 5,000 of the base's currency as a mercenary. These 2 requirements alone could filter out the vast majority of the young people within the base, such as Josh. When he was in his teens, he didn't choose to study the base's basic courses, but rather trained with the mercenary units instead. However, his performance as a mercenary could not be considered outstanding either. Even now, his feats had not earned him 5,000 R. Anji walked in and lined up at the end of the civilian queue. Yeah, be worth money or be worth brain. That's exactly it. Anji walked in and lined up at the end of the civilian queue. Perhaps he had arrived late, or perhaps the weather was too poor, for there were no other people behind him. The person who used to be at the end of the line heard his footsteps and turned back to look at him. Their eyes met. Anji felt a trace of awkwardness suffuse the air. Then he shifted his gaze to the nearby wall, and the young man swiftly turned his head away as well. The reason was none other than the fact that they could be considered acquaintances. This was the boy who pulled Anji along to demonstrate at the very beginning and called him comrade. Just yesterday, outside the city gates, he had mingled in the crowd of demonstrators opposing the arbiter and even waved at Anji. However, right on the spot, Anji had left with the arbiter while draped in the arbiter's clothes. He didn't wish to acknowledge Anji, and Anji didn't wish to acknowledge him either. In this manner, they silently stood in line. Man, the awkward tension that would be in what was sounding to be a huge line, waiting for that. Oof. Ugh, no thanks. The interviewer was a man who wore silver wire-rimmed glasses and had delicate and cold facial features. At a glance, he wasn't easy to interact with, but strangely, the speed at which the line shrank was very fast. Each person was only asked a few simple questions before they were admitted to another corridor behind the hall. There were occasionally some who were asked to leave, but their numbers were extremely low. In no more than an hour and a half, the line only had a few people left, and it came to the boy in front of Anji. But the interviewer gestured to pause and picked up his communicator. Please let the colonel know that he must come as quickly as possible. 5 minutes at most, he said. Sending these people to the main city is already breaking the rules. The main city's safety is the most important thing. There cannot be any mistakes, so the arbiter must be present. The main city? The boy in front of Anji said in surprise. We're going to the main city? Wasn't the city affairs office recruiting? The situation now is indeed what we didn't wish to see. The weather's violent changes weren't predicted, and the recovery of the dispersion center isn't something that can be completed in a short span of time. To ensure the main city's safety, the arbiter must evacuate with us. Humankind's interests take precedence over all else. Please remember this sentence. Yeah, that's the sentence that was put on his wall. With those words, he put down his communicator and glanced at the boy in front of Anji. The boy put his ID card on the sensor, and his information popped up on screen. Name, Colin, age 21, ID 32600700412. There was another screen in front of the interviewer, and Anji thought that it should have more detailed information. Colin voluntarily said, I've completed the basic courses for mathematics, physics, and biology. The interviewer gave a slight nod, then handed the ID card back to him and said, "Turn right and go out." It was Anji's turn next. After he swiped his card, he answered based on Anji's experience. "I've completed the courses for literature, language, and economics." "Your grades are good," the interviewer said. At that very moment, the loud sound of rain suddenly came from outside. The interviewer stuffed the card back into his hand and quickly said, "Hurry up and go." Anji swiftly cut up to Colin and walked into the corridor on the right. The corridor was a glass-covered bridge that had already been splattered with densely packed sprays from the large and concentrated raindrops, so the situation outside wasn't visible at all. They rapidly walked forward, but they saw that this covered bridge was connected to the train station platform. Next to the platform was a black, closed ground traffic controller. "My dad doesn't know yet," Colin said. "Are we going to the main city right now?" The interviewer grabbed his arm and stuffed him into a coach, saying, "Don't waste your breath." Anji was promptly stuffed in as well. Train seats were packed. Colin was frantically dialing his communicator, but he couldn't get through, and they came to the last coach. It was empty. Anji sat down in the very farthest corner, and behind him was the train's rear window, through which it was possible to clearly see the scene behind. The tracks were flooded in boundless misty rain. Colin sat down in the place furthest from him, continually dialing his communicator while talking to himself. "Something's wrong. There's definitely a problem. I have to go back." Practically jumped up from his seat, but what immediately followed was the sound of all the train's doors slamming shut at the same time. Colin hammered on the coach door several times, but he couldn't get it to move at all. On the contrary, he drew the train staff's attention. Right? The English names. The world ended and everyone got shoved into a base. Like, everyone. When you talk about a melting pot, there you go. Whole population dies. Colin hammered on the coach door several times, but he couldn't get it to move at all. On the contrary, he drew the train staff's attention. "Sit down properly," the train conductor was a strong man. "About to go to the main city. Why are you kicking up a fuss for?" "What are you kicking up a fuss for?" "My dad doesn't know yet," Colin said. "I can't suddenly leave. Is there something your guys are hiding from us?" The conductor was silent for 3 seconds before saying, "Your dad will be happy for you." In his seat, Colin gasped for breath. "Something's wrong, something's wrong." But despite repeating himself for a while, he couldn't articulate any reason for it, so he could only continue fiddling with his communicator. Anji quietly waited in the corner. 5 minutes later, the sound of the coach doors and a few voices carried over from the distance. And approximately 10 minutes later, the entire coach suddenly fell silent. "The arbiter has come to perform his inspections," a person in front of him said in a low voice. Following that was the sound of 2 people's footsteps, having the unique sound of military boots. It was very easy to recognize. When the footsteps came closer, he lifted his head. Then he met Lu Feng's eyes. "Okay. My God," the young judge behind Lu Feng said, looking at him as well. "We thought you weren't here." "I'm here?" As Anjin looked into Lu Feng's eyes, he felt faintly uneasy. Softly he asked, "Yeah, I'm here." As Anji looked into Lu Feng's eyes, he felt faintly uneasy. Softly he asked, "Did something happen?" This was his first time seeing this sort of thing in Lu Feng's expression, although the man's exterior looked no different from before. It wasn't coldness, yet it was very heavy. Lu Feng said, "Nothing's wrong." A voice came from his communicator. "How's the situation?" "Confirmed safe," Lu Feng replied. "Roger." Oh no. Someone went after his apartment. Oh man. Someone went after his apartment. Ji's uneasiness gradually increased and he lifted his head to look at Lu Feng. Lu Feng looked at him as well, but he didn't speak. Right at that moment, Colin suddenly said, his voice trembling and raspy, "I get it. I get it." Turned his head to look at the nearby conductor. "The disperser has failed in the end, hasn't it? Hasn't it? Studied physics. Ultrasound is a sound wave. The transmission of sound waves requires a medium. It's raining heavily right now, so the air temperature, density, and pressure have all changed. The medium has changed, so the frequency parameter must be adjusted anew, but the dispersion center is gone. There's no way to adjust it, isn't that right? The original frequency has lost its effectiveness in the heavy rain, hasn't it?" And his trembling voice trailed off. A scream suddenly came from the coach ahead. Bang! The glass next to Anji was also struck hard. Amidst the rain, a black-winged insect had rammed into the train glass. Anji looked outside the window, and the insect's 6 blood-red compound eyes stared at him. Locked eyes with this insect that was only the size of a human head and as long as a human arm, and watched it fly up in the rain before knocking into a window on the other side. The crisp sounds of the collisions came from outside the train in a continuous barrage. Through a sharp whistle, Anji saw that outside the window, the ground traffic controller in the fluorescent uniform made an abrupt forward gesture. Yeah, I agree. I do appreciate that aspect where everyone there's a sort of code, even if you don't like everybody, like you respect the order of things. Yeah. And before I also agreed with yours, Kiri about the liking how this book characters like Josh or Colin could have been some kind of love interest, jealous type. I mean, like Josh has a little bit of that, but like it really does have them as representations of the world condition and just the different conflicts presented. I like that too. All right. Forward gesture. The sound of shaking and rumbling started up together, and after a few clanks, the train gradually began moving forward. Colin let out a loud cry, then fainted while clutching his communicator. Oh, man. He's worried about his dad, man. And it's all the young people. So they're healthier and likelier to live longer. That's fucked up. Oh, that ground traffic controller was swarmed by countless insects, both big and small. In the sheets of rain, the bugs became blurred shadows as well. After only 5 or 6 seconds passed, his body crumpled to the ground while surrounded by the shadows, sending up a bloody spray of water. Oh, man. Rip to the train conductor, ground traffic controller. Like, F's in the chat for ground traffic controller, man. Oof. The train gradually sped up, and after going around a bend, his figure disappeared completely. Anji watched all of it with wide eyes. He stood up, facing the coach window in the back. Black shadows. Black shadows that blotted out the sky, round ones, long ones, irregular ones, massive worms wriggling on the ground, and insects with huge sickles that could swiftly move and jump. When did they arrive? Perhaps it was at the very second the downpour started. The roof clanged and cracks appeared on the window's outer glass, but the inner glass remained. The train sped up, flying forward, and Nanji lifted his head and looked at the entire city. What came down from the sky was not necessarily rain. Those things that blotted out the sky. It was an amalgamation of red and green raindrops mixed with blood. Monsters, monster body parts, and human body parts. Although the coach windows blocked some sound, he could still hear continuous screaming and shouting, along with the sounds of the other people within the coach dry heaving or trembling. After the heavy rain began, he stayed in the coach for 10 minutes, so he didn't know what kind of massacre was going on outside. Now he could imagine it. How many people lived and how many people would die? He couldn't imagine it. He couldn't see the entire city. The base made a plan for worst-case scenario yesterday, the young judge murmured. Transferring young and useful personnel was an emergency measure. It's just that we didn't imagine that the unexpected would arrive so quickly. His voice was a bit hoarse. My apologies. If we were given a few more days, perhaps the military could have recovered this dispersion center, but now there was no more time, and nobody could predict what would happen next. Anji knew what he wanted to say, just like how in the abyss nobody knew what would happen next. He put his hand on the coach glass. The glass was stained with a layer of red. Yeah. I agree. Like, the explanation and reasoning behind the science in this book and the actual history and world building has been absolutely phenomenal. Right? It passes the physics vibe check. Agreed. Also passes the history vibe check for me. World building on point. He put his hand on the coach glass. The glass was stained with a layer of red and mixed with bits of flesh. As he looked outside, his breathing was slightly hurried. Just like that, the train swiftly departed District 6. The bloody water gradually diluted, and the coach glass was washed clean and became clear again. In the abyss, he had seen countless monster attacks, struggles, injuries, and deaths. But he had never seen something like this. This kind of one-sided slaughter and instant destruction. The voice of the person in front of him trembled as he continued speaking. Just like that, it's gone. It was gone. Oh, and that's the end of it. I guess. It's gone. And so is the chapter. We are now... Here, let me put these to the side so it doesn't go again. We're now at Book 2 Roses. We are on the train and we are headed somewhere. But yeah. And we didn't drop the stream. Woohoo! Yay! Jazz hands! And I also love the world building in this book. It's really believable, and I think it's also really fascinating how the time period is almost current. Like we discovered in last video where they told the history. Let me see if I can find it real quickly. Right, yay! Yeah. And the geomagnetics field changes were discovered in 2020. Had Plan A, B, 240. Plan B succeeded in 2043. Plan A succeeded, and were called the Dawn Age. Yeah, it's fascinating because, like, yeah, it is 2020. That's when things changed. Which, I mean, that was when things really changed. So it's cool for it to be interlocked as a physics vibe check, but it's still from a sci-fi bend. Definitely. I guess it makes it feel a little more tangible that it's not 3,000 years into the future. It's, yeah, we really need to take care of our environment better because it's going to shit. like one of those. But anyway, this has been fantastic. I am definitely invested and excited to get to Book 2 Roses. And so I think I'm going to stick to Tuesday, Thursday as the days I will be streaming with 8 CST, Central Standard Time, being my time. And we'll go from there. I think I may have fixed the internet thing, but I'm going to talk to someone who knows a heck of a lot more about computers and technology than I do to see if I can definitely fix the internet thing. So it'll be more like this stream where we didn't have to worry about buffering. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I had a fantastic time. I loved all the back and forth with the comments. If there's anything that you think I could do better or that you really enjoyed, please leave a comment either on the video or here in the chat right now, and I'll answer it back, or just be super excited about it. Like, thank you so much for coming. I wish you well, there's two of you on here right now. I wish you both, Curie Signori and Mo Mars Rover, a very wonderful night and a fantastic weekend. And we'll hopefully see you on Tuesday for the start of book 2. Well, book 1, book 2 at 8 CST. Good night. Aw, thank you too.